Dear friends, although I was not born an Indian, there is very little about my appearance, my tastes, my habits, and my traditions to distinguish me from a daughter of the soil. Had I been born 20 years earlier than I was, I would have been an Indian in every sense of the term. My father was born before partition. The strange history of this subcontinent made him a citizen of 3 states, his daughter a citizen of 2. In a village in what was then East Bengal, there once lived a farmer. His name was Haradhan Sarkar, one of whose sons, Komal Krishna Sarkar, driven to fury by Jamindari oppression, converted to Islam and became KamalUddin Sarkar. I belong to this family. Haradhan Sarkar was my great-grandfather's father. Haradhan's other descendants obviously moved to India either during or after partition and became citizens of this country. My great-grandfather, a Muslim, didn't. Even though I was born well after partition, I wrote a number of poems and stories lamenting the loss of undivided Bengal, indeed undivided India, even before I visited this country. I simply could not bring myself to accept the bit of barbed wire which kept families and friends apart, even though they shared a common language and culture. What hurt most was that this wire had been secured by religion. By my early teens, I had abandoned religion and turned towards secular humanism and feminism, which sprang from within me and were in no way artificially imposed. My father, a man with a modern scientific outlook, encouraged me to introspect, and as I grew older, I broke away not just from religion, but also from all religious customs, indeed, the very culture which constantly oppressed, suppressed, and denigrated women. When I first visited India, especially West Bengal, in 1989, I did not for an instant think I was in a foreign land. From the moment I set foot on Indian soil, I knew I belonged here, and that it was, in some fundamental way, inseparable from the land I called my own. The reason for this was not my Hindu ancestors. The reason was not that one of India's many cultures is my own, or that I speak one of India's many languages, or that I look Indian. It is because the values and traditions of India are embedded deeply within me. These values and traditions are a manifestation of the history of the subcontinent. I'm a victim of that history. Then again, I have been enriched by it. I'm a victim of its poverty, colonial legacy, faiths, communalism, violence, bloodshed, partition, migrations, exodus, riots, wars, and even theories of nationhood. I have been hardened further by my life and experiences in a dirty, poverty and famine-stricken, ill-governed theocracy called Bangladesh. The intolerance, fanaticism, and bigotry of Islamic fundamentalists forced me to leave Bangladesh. I was forced to go into exile. The doors of my own country slammed shut on my face for good. Since that moment, I sought refuge in India. When I was finally allowed entry after a few years, not for an instant did I think I was in an alien land. Why did I not think so, especially when every other country in Asia, Europe, and America felt alien to me? Even after spending 12 years in Europe, I could not think of Europe as my home. It took less than a year to think of India as my home. Is it because we, India and I, share a common history? Had East Bengal remained a province of undivided India, would the state have tolerated an attack on basic human freedoms and values and the call for the death by hanging of a secular writer by the proponents of fundamentalist Islam and self-seeking politicians? How would a secular democracy have reacted to this threat against one of its own? Or is the burden of defending human and democratic values solely a European or American concern? The gates of India remained firmly shut when I needed her shelter the most. The Europeans welcomed me with open arms, yet in Europe I always considered myself a stranger, an outsider. After 12 long years in exile, when I arrived in India, it felt as though I had been resurrected from some lonely grave. I knew this land, I knew the people. I had grown up somewhere very similar, almost indistinguishable. I felt the need to do something for this land and its people. There was a burning desire within me to see women are educated and independent. Women stand up for and demand their equal rights and freedom. I wanted my writings to contribute in some way to the empowerment of these women who had always been oppressed. While I was living in West Bengal, a few fatwas were issued against me, and some Islamic fundamentalists in Hyderabad chose to launch a physical attack upon me. After hearing of the incident in Hyderabad, Muslim fundamentalist leaders in West Bengal became so excited that they wasted no time in issuing a new fatwa against me and set price on my head. Almost 25% of India's population is Muslim, and unfortunately, the most vocal representatives of this considerable community are fundamentalists. No educated, civilized, cultured, secular, and enlightened Muslim is regarded as representative of the community. What can be a greater tragedy than this? India was my second home. Because a handful of Muslim fanatics did not want me to stay in India, I was forced to leave the country in 2008. Recently, I have written a book remembering those painful days. In my book, Exile, I wrote about the series of events leading to my ouster from West Bengal, then Rajasthan, and eventually India. My house arrest, my anxious days, and I had had to spend in the government safe house, beset by a scheming array of bureaucrats and ministers desperate to see me gone. Without a single political party, social organizations, or renowned personality by my side, I had been a lone, exiled, dissenting voice up against the entire state machinery with only my determination at my disposal. But there was one thing I was sure of. I had not done anything wrong. So why should I be punished unfairly? Why wouldn't I be allowed to live in a country I love? Why would a nation that prides itself on being a secular democracy bow down to the dictates of a section of dishonest, misogynist, intolerant fanatics and banish an honest, secular humanist writer? Despite being forced to live, I have eventually ignored all the prohibitions and bans and threats and come back to India. I have come back. I have come back because I have nothing else but India, and because I hope India will one day truly encourage free thoughts. I wish to live in this country and be allowed the freedom to express my opinions, even if they are contrary to others. I wish for neighboring nations to learn from India's example and be inspired. They who yet do not know the meaning of the freedom of speech. Writers across the world are being persecuted, whipped, tortured, imprisoned, killed, and exiled. But leave alone dictators, even democratic governments are no longer interested in the freedom of expression. Whenever I try to point out the significance of such a fundamental right, I am informed that even the freedom of speech must have its limitations and that it cannot be used to hurt someone's sentiments. Wouldn't it be extremely difficult to ensure that you never hurt someone's sentiments? People keep hurting us, intentionally or not, by words or deeds. Our world is populated by a multitude of opposing mindsets. They clash and hurt each other, but also have an inbuilt mechanism to manage hurt. Unfortunately, religious fanatics use the excuse of injured sentiments to cause further mischief, refusing to listen or be placated. It is a moment of crisis for democracy when a citizen is robbed of their right to speak and express their opinions. Social change makes it necessary that a few feathers will be ruffled and a few egos will be wounded. It hurts people's sentiments when you try to separate religion and state, when you attempt to abolish misogynistic laws. Equality between men and women cannot be achieved without hurting religious sentiments. A lot of people had been outraged when the crown and the state were being forcibly separated in the continent. Galileo's and Darwin's views had upset many pious people of their times. The superstitious are routinely offended by the evolution and advancement of science. If we stop expressing our opinions because someone will be hurt by it, if we curb the growth and development of scientific knowledge, if we forcibly try to stall the march of civilization, we will end up inhabiting a stagnant quagmire instead of basking in a possibly raging cascade of knowledge and plenitude. If the objective is to say exactly what everyone would love to listen to, then we would have no need for the freedom of speech. Such rights are important primarily for those whose opinions usually do not follow the status quo. Freedom of speech is the freedom to say something you might not like to hear. Those who never hurt other sentiments do not need the freedom of speech. A state that chooses to side with those who seek to oppose such freedoms instead of ensuring that they are brought to book will be responsible for its own eventual annihilation. Sometime back, one such draconian law against freedom of speech was abolished by the government of India. I was among those who had worked towards this goal, and our success was a significant acknowledgement of the systematic persecution many have had to go through because of such laws. I have had to face it too. This is why I'm glad to have been part of such a reform initiative, despite not being a pure-born citizen of India. The world is constantly vigilant that no one hurts the sentiments of those who are opposed to human rights and women's rights. When will the world learn to see all as equal? When will it learn to stop pleasing extremists and begin respect to reason and humanism instead? In Bangladesh, you may know that Hindu temples and homes are again attacked by Muslim fanatics. You also know secular bloggers and progressive people were hacked to death. And you know about the terrorist attack at Dhaka Cafe. Those terrorists were around 12 years old. They were not poor, not illiterate. Heavily indoctrinated in Islam, they shouted Allahu Akbar while slaughtering people. Those terrorists had nothing but religion as their guide. Young men have been brainwashed with Islam. They have been fed the belief that non-believers, non-Muslims, and critics of Islam should be killed. By killing them, they have been convinced they will go to heaven. They have also been taught that jihad is mandatory for every Muslim, and Muslims should strive to turn Darul Harb, or the land of the enemy, into Darul Islam, or the land of Islam. There is no point trying to confuse the issue by saying that poverty, frustration, lack of jobs, and the absence of hope force people to become terrorists. It is, in fact, the other way around. The new terrorists are often rich and educated, highly qualified professionals who have been seduced by fanaticism. They join terrorist organizations because they know they will be at liberty to do whatever they wish to do and be given the sanction to rape, kill, and torture at will. Many organizations and institutions in Bangladesh have been funded by Islamic fundamentalists from rich Arab countries for decades. Madrasas and mosques have long been breeding grounds for Islamic fundamentalists. Islamization in Bangladesh started not long after its creation in 1971. It is tragic that Bangladesh, whose very birth was premised on secularism and a rejection of the two-nation theory, has degenerated into an Islamic fundamentalist country. In the early 90s, when I was attacked by Islamic fundamentalists, a fatwa was issued against me, a price was set on my head, and hundreds of thousands of Muslim fundamentalists took to the streets demanding my execution. The government, instead of taking action against those fundamentalists, filed a case against me on the charges of hurting religious sentiments of people. I was forced to leave the country, and that was the beginning of what today's Bangladesh is, a medieval and intolerant nation of bigots, extremists, and fanatics. I truly hope that the secular movement in my country will begin again and turn into a positive political movement for a true democracy and a secular state, a state which affirms a strict separation between religion and state and maintains a uniform civil code, a set of secular laws that are not based on religion but instead on equality, and an education system that is secular, scientific, and enlightenment-based. People must know that Islam should not be exempt from the critical scrutiny that applies to other religions as well. They must understand that Islam has to go through an enlightenment process similar to what other religions have gone through by questioning the inhuman, unequal, unscientific, and irrational aspects of religion. The narrow-minded and the political will forever seek to plunge society into darkness and chaos, while a handful of others will always strive for the betterment of society and to have good sense prevail. It is always a few special people who seek to bring about change. That is how it has always been. I have been living in exile since 1994. I know I have no other alternative but to live in exile for the rest of my life. I feel I have nowhere to go, no country or home to return to. I say now, India is my country, India is my hope. How much more will I have to suffer at the hands of fundamentalists and their political allies for the cardinal sin of daring to articulate the truth? Even after all that has happened, I still believe, I still dream, that for a sincere, honest, truly secular writer of the subcontinent, India is the safest refuge, the only refuge.